The rhythm was abruptly changed by the overloaded sorrel mare entering the plaza. One man slumped in the saddle, his feet dangling loosely to the sides, his swaying head tied round with a dirty red bandana. The other feet in the stirrups rode behind him. His hands passed under the arms of the first to hold him upright, grasped the reins. Behind on the rump bobbled the bloody carcass of a deer held by rope lashings. Something was wrong. It tainted the air. Yet no man shrouded in his impenetrability betrayed himself by anxious questions. The women, after one quick look, walked by with averted faces. Children ducked into the willows bordering the stream like baby chickens at sight of a hawk. Only a quick tension rippled through all. The mare plodded the mare plodded slowly across the plaza, forded the stream, and stopped at an adobe building with glass windows and a shiny brass doorknob behind the pueblo, the government office of the reservation. An Indian youth with short hair came out, followed by a white man in spectacles. They lifted Martiniano off the mare and half carried him inside. Paleman nodded respectfully, then walked his horse back across the plaza. He met his wife coming down to the stream with a water jar on her head. She was a good woman. She had risen to find her husband gone, his rifle gone. His face was grave. Her own was worried as she wondered why he had left her at night, not for deer. But she did not voice her worry and thus betrayed her man by lack of faith. She simply greeted him with a look, receiving his curt nod as she modestly lowered her gaze and walked on to her task. Paleman rode around the pueblo, down a rutty road and back, outside the town wall, across a cornfield bounded by plum thickets. He reined up in front of a small adobe hut. To one side was a small log corral. In front stood an old springless wagon. The place revealed drabness and poverty. The drabness was colored with scarlet strings of chilies hanging from protruding viga ends. The poverty was belittled by a huge heap of Indian corn in front of the corral. A woman was seated before it in the sunlight, shucking the corn. As she stripped off the pale leaves wet with dew, the ears leapt from her hands into another pile, black, blue, red, yellow, white, and speckled. When Paleman rode up, she stood. She was a young woman. Work had not yet made her tough, weathered, and stringy. Repeated childbirth had not yet made of her long, slim body a shapeless sack. She was dressed in a tattered shawl, a dirty gingham, and a pair of sloppy shoes laced with string. Bits of corn silk littered her black hair. Ceremonially dressed, she might have been almost beautiful. Her lips quivered and her big black eyes were restless. The play of muscles around both and her sensitive brown skin seemed expressive of her Indian name, Flowers Playing. But she waited patiently for Paleman to speak. "He is safe but hurt," he said quietly, "but not too hurt to send you this meat, see? It is gutted and there has been cut out just a piece. Now I shall carry it and string it up for you, so you may skin it properly, taking care to conceal the hide and horns from all idle questioning." He dismounted to do as he had said. He returned and swung back upon his mare. The woman shuffled up to him and laid her hand on the mare's neck. "Is it proper I go at once?" Paleman smiled, a slow fire that warmed the marrow in her bones. "Why not? But why not wait until his head is washed and properly bound, and he can return?" "As you will. Have no fear. But ask no questions. There will be trouble. Not much, but trouble. It is necessary I report it, and so hold my tongue out until it is bidden me to speak. Adios." He wheeled his mount and cantered off. Riding back into the plaza, he dismounted in front of the pueblo. An old man was squatting on the ground against the sunny wall and whittling a cedar stick. His long brown fingers were bony and prehensile as the talons of a hawk. His tattered shirt and trousers tied round with a blanket held skinny, brittle limbs. Perhaps he was the man of whom the old joke was said, "Indians don't die, they just dry up and blow away." But when he raised his face, there was in it something one seldom sees now, dark and wrinkled, at once kind and indomitable. It held the keen black eyes of a man who has long known all the vagaries of weather and men's passions alike, and who has seen through them to the calm heart of all storms. He was the governor of the pueblo. So Paleman stood in front of him in silence, a big man, grave and stern, but with a respectful posture. The government stare probed his own steady glance. The old man clicked shut his little pocket knife and laid aside his whittled stick. Deliberately he gathered up all the cedar shavings, held them to his nose, and then stuffed them in the fold of his blanket. "You will come inside, my son." Paleman flung his reins to one of the boys playing nearby with bright pebbles, and followed him inside the doorway. The room with the door shut seemed dark and cold. An old crone was sweeping up clouds of dust from the earthen floor with a handful of popote. The old man drove her to an inner room with a torrent of idioma. When the door was shut, he seated himself on a low stool in front of a burning twig and motioned the visitor to the seating ledge. There was the silence of actors in the moment before the curtain rises. These two men had their roles, but they were not actors. Their roles were the assumption of symbols of a life that had never grown too stale to lose the significance of its drama and its ever-present mystery. The governor took out a cigarette paper, smoothed out its wrinkles. Paleman dutifully offered tobacco and was asked to smoke himself, if he desired. As the men puffed, the objects of the room stood out more clearly. The patterns of the cheap cotton blankets and fine old serapes on the seating ledge, the old bows and arrows, the paper Catholic saints hanging on the walls, the herbs dangling from the vigas, the old carven santo in his niche. The governor threw away his stub. It is of that Martiniano you would speak? Now that is for the outside chiefs. You will have to report it to the war captain. But I will listen first. There may be that which concerns us all. As evening dusk began to blur the two pale splotches on the highest housetops, a third appeared. For minutes his deep, clear voice sang out sonorously to all below. It was like a summons, like a muezzin's call at twilight. Each man stopped to listen, then continued to his task. Wood and water were brought, horses were shut up in their corrals, burros were herded into their communal log enclosure. The people shut themselves up in the pueblo like a race self-entombed in a pyramid. Strips of ribs were cut from carcasses hanging from the rafters, cooked and eaten with Chilean tortillas. Cheap, fresh coffee was added to the morning's grounds, boiled and drunk. Cornhusk cigarettes were rolled and puffed. And now in warm, smoky households the people sat resting in flame light. Children rolled up in serapes and blankets stretched out along the seating ledges. Women prepared beds and floor mats, but the old men still sat nodding before the coals. Who knew what o'clock it was? There was no battered clocks, no dollar Ingersolls that kept time. The people likely couldn't read them anyway. They had no sense of time, these people. To them, time was no moving flow to be measured, ticked out and struck at funny intervals. Time was all one, ever present and indestructible. It was they who moved through it. There was only the consciousness of the moment for right action. No one knew how it came, but when it came they obeyed. So suddenly, all at once, doors began to open, and the old men, drawing their blankets closer overhead and shoulders, stepped out into the dark. They walked in their aloneness, slow and silent, across the two squared timbers over the stream, toward the end of the pueblo where a door stayed open. A trickle of light flowed out upon two men swathed in blankets standing against the wall. They would stand here in cold and darkness all night on guard. A meeting of the council had been called. The old men walked in slowly and sat down silently on the ledge running around three walls. Paleman wore a new red blanket and a proud dark face. Martiniano, a white bandage around his head and a sallow face. Being young men, not members of the council, they seated themselves close to the door, beside two younger still already there. It was a big room scattered on the plank floor were little wooden boxes filled with clean sand. The whitewashed walls were clean and bare except for the silver-headed canes of authority of the governor, and the lieutenant governor hanging below a picture of Abraham Lincoln, their donor. The vigas supporting the roof gleamed dark yellow as honey. A man dipped into the flame a branch of cedar. As it burned in his hand, he walked about the room so that its sharp, clean odor filled the air. In the middle of the room sat a deal table holding one candle stuck in a shiny black stick of Santa Clara ware. The only two chairs in the room were drawn up before it. In one sat an intelligent-looking middle-aged man in American clothes, save that the heels of the shoes had been removed, and a blanket was wrapped around his middle. He would probably not open his mouth all evening, for while most of those present spoke Spanish and understood English, they would speak tonight only in their own tongue, but this was his usual post. The occupant of the other chair drew it back to the fire. He was a seamed crag that still jutted out unbroken into the waves of life. There was snow in his straggly hair, moss on his face. His eyes were like those of a sun-hawk, of a mystic, of an old man who really couldn't focus very well on near objects. They were the most compelling things in the room, for while those of the governor who sat behind him saw through all the passions of weather and men to the calm heart of all storms, these eyes saw farther. They saw the stormy soul of creation within the calm. They were the eyes that watched the sunsets from the highest housetop to make solar observations as the sun left its house mountain between the two peaks on the western horizon, that determined for his people his solstices and the times for ceremonial dances. He was the cacique, holding hereditary office for life. On the ledge behind him on each side of the governor sat the lieutenant governor, the war captain, the fiscal, and their assistants, and all the Kiva chiefs. And about them wrinkled as cedar bark, with blankets drawn up around their shoulders. Nearly 40 men, all old, but of whom it was more respectfully said, "Counselors sing, they do not dance." The door was closed, and still they sat unspeaking, hunching blankets closer. It was a terrible tension, the deathless silence, the dim light, the dark somber faces now shrouded, so that only the eyes stared out black and bright as beads. It was as if they gathered to read from symbols those meanings which were themselves symbols of a life whose substance they felt but could not see, whose edges they touched, like the shape of a door, but could not open. The governor broke it. He grinned a little toothlessly, and picked up a brown paper bag from the floor to slide across the table. The interpreter walked with it around the room, pausing before each man. In it was a roll of huge black tobacco leaves, folded when damp and now dry and hard. Punch from the mountains of Mexico, strong as the kick of a horse. A gift from the strange white man, Rodolfo Byers, their favorite trader for over 30 years. So each man chuckled and made a little joke as he broke off a pinch, crushed it between calloused palms, and rolled a cigarette. They sat and smoked and spit into the little wooden boxes filled with sand on the floor before them.